Hello, and welcome to the Warrior in a Garden podcast. My name is Greg Copeland. I am the owner of Synergy Coaching and Wellness, as well as Jade Dragon, Neigong, and Kung Fu Academy. This is our second installment of the podcast, and like we talked about last week, we're going to dive into the idea of self-mastery just a little bit today. So as we look at the discussion outline for our podcast today, first of all, we're going to look a little bit about self-mastery and discuss what exactly is self-mastery. And we'll look at developing the three selves. We're going to look at body, mind, spirit, and we're going to call those the three selves for the purpose of this discussion. We can certainly get off into the weeds talking about how different traditions may look at how the three selves would actually be defined. But for our discussion here, and as we look at the self-mastery process and program that we have, this is what we're going to look at: body, mind, and spirit. So we're not going to get into the more esoteric discussions about those, even though I know that the potential for that is out there. We can certainly grow those discussions as we move along. We'll look at the various methods to achieve self-mastery. To me, given my background in fitness and with martial arts, I think we look at the physical training and the physical side of our being. It doesn't have to be martial arts, but we have to develop ourselves physically. We have to have a strong, healthy body. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means, because what we look at as Westerners maybe doesn't fit that description, especially as we grow older. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll look at Qigong, internal martial arts, and different practices like that can help us on our way. We'll talk a little bit about meditation and mindfulness as we look at developing the mind aspect. And I want to touch very briefly on a Chinese classic called the Yi Jin Jing. And when I talk about this, we're not going to be talking about the exercise that you can YouTube out there and see. It's the classic itself, and it's about how the body's developed in a particular way. And then we'll close out by discussing what the first 10 discussions of self-mastery would be. And that's basically the footprint for how we accomplish the goal of self-mastery. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the like button, subscribe to the Synergy Coaching channel, and it'll really help us grow. It'll grow the channel, and it'll help us get the word out and kind of hopefully touch some different people that we can help with what we try and accomplish here at Synergy. So I would appreciate that. Thanks. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about developing the three selves. As I mentioned before, the three selves are for the sake of our discussion here today. The three selves are going to be mind, body, and spirit. So let's start with body, because honestly, probably surprisingly, maybe the easiest to tackle of the three as we begin this journey. Now let me back up for just a minute. I do want to say that as we look at developing self-mastery, we want balance in all three of these aspects. So like I talked about in the first podcast, when I started Synergy Coaching, and actually it started out as Synergy Business Strategies, and then it morphed into Synergy Coaching, and now it's Synergy Coaching and Wellness, because that's just the direction that it took us. Okay, it's kind of got a life of its own. But when I first set out and named my company Synergy, it's all about balance and things acting within themselves synergistically. So when we talk about developing the three selves, it's really important that they have this synergy and this balance. So as we talk about the three different things, none is more important than the other. And so I mentioned the body first because it's a little bit easier to look at the wellness aspect of your body, okay? How to get your body strong. And when we talk about developing the body, it's not just about fitness. It's about an overall wellness. And when I talk about that, from a Western sense, when we look at people that we think are healthy, we typically look at, lean, thin, people that can go out and run a long distance. And all of these things are certainly important. We don't want to disregard things like the body mass index. We don't want to disregard just our overall health in a measurable sense like that. However, when we talk about from a self-mastery perspective, we want to look at like just an overall picture of our wellness. And I always break this down into basically three things. Within our body, we want our body to be strong, we want our body to be supple, and we want our body to be efficient. So when I talk about strong, okay, obviously we know that means having like physical attributes that of strength. That does not necessarily mean that we look at a bodybuilder and consider a bodybuilder to be the ideal for a strong body, because a lot of times with bodybuilders, they look great, they're lean, but they're not very supple, and they're certainly not, their body's not overly efficient. And I can attest to this. I've been down that road before. When I first got out of college, I got into lifting a lot of weights, and as we talk about Yi Jin Jing, the body as it ages becomes brittle, and we want to stay away from that brittleness. And lifting heavy weights oftentimes leads towards that. So you get strong, but lose suppleness. Okay, and as you lose suppleness, you kind of hinder your body's efficiency. So I want to tie that into a larger discussion of the Yi Jin Jing. And I am going to have, I've got a podcast that I'm working on to discuss the Yi Jin Jing in a much larger degree. So I'm going to really kind of just give you a 1,000-foot view of what the Yi Jin Jing actually is. So the Yi Jin Jing, it's an ancient Chinese classic that there's a lot of discussion about the history. It's the same thing with most everything that has ancient Chinese origins. There's discussions about where Tai Chi came from. There's discussion about where the Yi Jin Jing came from. The bottom line is, it doesn't really matter. Okay, what matters is the context of what the Yi Jin Jing is about. And so the Yi Jin Jing is, in a nutshell, it is a progressive development process that the ancient Taoists came up with. And it may have been Shaolin monks. We don't know. My tradition with this is more Taoist in nature. So, it could have been the Buddhist, it could have been the Taoist, but again, that doesn't matter. The context revolves around Qi and the ability for your body to move Qi and create a strong, efficient body. And you do this by lengthening and creating space for this internal energy that's called qi to efficiently move within the body. That opens the door for a lot of discussion about 5-element training, and the different things that go along with that. But if you have an internal art that you're studying, if it's not based in the I Ching Ching and the processes of the I Ching Ching, it's probably not going to be a very effective art. Simply because if you're not creating space for your energies to move efficiently, then that's the key to internal work and qigong and various neigong processes. So let's move on to the mind. As we get into the mind, it's probably the greatest challenge, actually, especially in the world we live in today. We are constantly bombarded by external input, and it is never ending. If you live in a city, it's even worse because you've got not just the noise of TVs, radios, social media, just emails, work, all of these different inputs, but you can't even walk away from it, because if you walk out into the street, you're constantly bombarded by the input of cars and street noises and police sirens. It goes on and on. So it's really hard to find that peacefulness in your mind, and the objective is really the Chinese call it controlling the wild monkeys. And basically it's being able to just sit still and be in the moment and to kind of move everything out so that you can focus inward. That'll grow into a bit of mindfulness. We'll talk a little bit more about mindfulness here in just a minute. But the first part of dealing with the mind aspect of what we do is just learning to sit still. So if we can learn to sit still, I think that takes us a long way and can help lead us to mindfulness. So as we talk about mindfulness, this will be one of the topics that we discuss specifically in future podcasts. When we look at mindfulness, a big part of that is learning to live in the moment. It's interesting because you can look at some of the bigger mental issues that people deal with, and most of them are going to stem from either anxiety or they're going to stem from depression. Those are probably two of the major, just really superficial issues that people deal with. And with mindfulness and being in the moment, my teachers have always told me, and I believe it to be true, that anxiety has its basis in spending too much time in the future. Whether that be you're worried about your mortgage payment, your rent payment, the various bills coming up. You're worried about, what does your job hold for you? Are you going to remain employed? Right now there's so many issues in the world. Here in the United States, it's, inflation is ridiculously high. Are you going to be able to afford, to pay for food and basics? Gas at $5 a gallon. How are you going to manage, getting to and from the places you need to be? So that's living out there in the future. And those types of issues tend to create anxieties, and we want to stay away from those as much as possible. The other side of that with depression, depression typically comes from living too much in the past. Depressive episodes typically, and this is not clinical, okay? This is just kind of intuitive and basic. Depressive episodes, I realize that there's probably some imbalance with energies within the body that lead to this as well. But typically people that go into depressive moods are spending too much time in the past. So anyway, those are the things with the mind that we want to work with, and here in just a few minutes we'll talk about what we do within the self-mastery series to help alleviate some of that. So finally, we want to talk about the spirit side of things, and when we talk about the spirit, we're talking about, I'll call it the somewhat intangible self, because there's a certain level of tangible being within the spirit as you get deeper into Neigong work, and the intangible then becomes a bit tangible. But for the sake of our discussions here, it's kind of the intangible self. And when we work on the spiritual side of who we are, we want to find and return to the base of who you are. So as we grow, our life is loaded with various experiences and different things that have happened that kind of create the person that we are. And sometimes those events have a tendency to cover us over. They kind of cover over what our true self is. And as we begin to delve back into the spirit side of who we are, we kind of want to peel a lot of that away and kind of get back to our true self. That's quite a journey to undertake, and it's not. I'm not sure. I don't want to get too much into the long-term journey of that, but the more of these events that we can peel away and gain understanding from, and kind of help us understand, why we react to something in a particular way, will help us to manage on a daily basis and deal with different things in a more positive perspective, and help us in our interactions, but also help us develop inwardly and help find the base of who we are, and kind of lead us to a more spiritual existence. I don't want to get into a whole lot of dogma about different religions and different things of that nature. I leave those types of decisions up to individual people, because everybody's going to have a different pathway for that. But at any rate, that's a rudimentary look at the spirit side of who we are, and that these are all three of these are the things that we're going to dive into, and as we begin to build our self-mastery plan, we're going to tackle all of these things. So what are the tools that we have for self-mastery? So when we look at the body, we've got physical training, and I would list Kung Fu in that martial arts, and I'll tell you a little bit why as we move forward a little bit. But physical training for sure, because we have to have a strong, healthy body. That's the beginning point, and working within that part of ourselves, we probably should do that on a daily basis at some level. And all of this depends on where you are, right? It's where you're starting in this journey. It may be just getting off the couch and going for a 20-minute walk every day. whether it's in your neighborhood or whether you want to go to the park or whatever. Just get outside and walk. Beyond that beginning level, there are multiple avenues that you can pursue. So as we're addressing the physical fitness and strength side, you have to have a strong body. So even as you get into like different Qigong practices, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute, because I've got a little bit different view on the way Qigong work is done. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. But when we look at our physical training, I want to go back to training with our focus on body development being strong, supple, and efficient. And the efficient part is the interesting part, because that ties back to being supple. Our body's just simply not efficient when we're bound up, with our musculature and in other areas as well. So internally we can be bound up as well. But from a physical perspective, if we spend too much time on muscular development practice, then you tend to bind yourself up and you bind your energies up, and it really creates a less efficient body. We'll talk about all those things as we get into the particular components of the self-mastery practice. Another great tool for self-mastery is Qigong work and internal arts. I teach different Qigong methods. I teach Neigong methods. I teach Tai Chi. I teach Bagua. I teach Xingyi. The last three are actually internal martial arts. Of those three, I find Bagua to be probably the most energetically effective, for people. It takes a long time to develop Tai Chi properly to benefit from the energetics, whereas Bagua, with the types of movements and the stretching and the pressurization, I should say, of different parts of the body really help with energetics a little bit quicker than Tai Chi does. Although Tai Chi is a fantastic practice, and when I started martial arts, I actually started with Tai Chi, but it's very effective. But I guess probably I should start with what is Qigong actually. In a rudimentary sense, Qigong work and internal arts work it's a practice of combining breath, movement, and energetic focus. And I will tie back into this the idea of the Yi Jin Jing, to where we want to stretch the body and we want to open up the various energy pathways within the body, and we want to unbind the body and kind of unwind all of the destruction that we've done for a long period of time. So Qigong is excellent for that because it tends to have a lot of stretching and a lot of movement and releasing. It's a little bit different than yoga, and I don't pretend to know a whole lot about yoga, but I think that yoga is probably pretty effective as well. My tradition is obviously in the Qigong work, and Qigong done properly is actually work. So I think that I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about this earlier. Most Qigong that you see, like if you pulled up Baduan Jin, okay, that's just a very basic Qigong exercise, and you looked into on YouTube, all right, and you looked at the way that most Baduan Jin is done. It's done kind of really flowing and there's not quite enough external work, I guess, to say it's to make it simple, but it's not quite that flowery. It's not just breathing and moving a little bit. There needs to be a little bit of strength applied to it, and a little bit of that. The structure is the word that you want to use, because you definitely want to be open, but effective Qigong work actually has internal structure. As I teach my students, typically we use the old admonition about it's the bones up and flesh down. So you want to keep structure, but you want to be supple and relaxed at the same time. So most Qigong work that I see done on YouTube probably lacks a little bit of the structured side of it. So anyway, let's get a little bit into the weeds on Qigong. We'll talk a lot about internal arts and different methods of working with that. Another tool really important, especially for the mind and down the road spiritually as well, is meditation. And I'm not going to get into the dogmatic discussions about what meditation is. Pretty much no matter what I say here, there's going to be some meditation purist that will tell you that nope, it's this, nope, it's that. It's a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it even transforms as you move through different Taoist traditions. It becomes different at differing levels. So when I'm talking about meditation here today, I'm talking about it on a very rudimentary basis, and it's obviously something that would grow as your practice with it grows. But for the short term of meditation, it's really the art of being still and a little bit of focused breath and learning to control the wild monkeys. I used that term a little while ago. I don't know how many of you, just try it sometime. If you've never done meditation at all, just sit down and just breathe for just a little while and just see how many different places your mind goes to. You'll rehash 25 different things that occurred throughout the last 10 hours of your day. And the idea behind an early level of meditation is just to learn how to stop doing that. Just to find time to just sit down and be still. It's the first step towards developing mindfulness. And as you learn different meditative techniques, you learn how to soak the mind through the body in different ways, and there's a lot of different things a lot of pathways that it can lead you down. But for very early, it's just sitting still. Learn to just take 15 minutes and then expand it as time goes on. But just eliminate input for just a little while, and you'd be amazed at the benefits that you would achieve from doing that. So we'll talk about as we get into it, we'll talk in future podcasts about different meditative techniques and different ways you can get started with that, how to fit that into your plan. Okay, your self-mastery plan, because I have a template of what it is, and we'll talk about those over the next coming weeks. But and I'll outline those at the end of today's podcast, just exactly what that looks like. But future podcasts down the line, we'll talk about different meditative techniques. We'll talk about different Qigong work. We'll talk in depth about the Yi Jin Jing, and I'll explain it to you in depth so that maybe it's easier to understand what I'm talking about, and the whole concept of developing this efficient body. So anyway, one last thing about meditation is if it's the first step toward being in a position to begin to peel away those layers of just stuff that we were talking about before. And it kind of helps you dive back in to finding your true self. If you continually bombard yourself with input, you'll never give yourself the chance to look inward very often. And I think that that's a really, really, really important practice. So that's meditation, and those are the basic tools for self-mastery. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that we're going to talk about, and life is meant to be lived, and we'll certainly look at a lot of different ways to incorporate these things, but enjoy the other things that make life worth living for you. So that covers tools for mastery. So like I talked about, I have a template, a pathway, as it were, that I've developed over time, and it ties back. Most of this ties back to my Shaolin traditions, but when it comes to specific work within this template, I tie in a lot of my Taoist traditions with it. My students will tell you that I kind of mix and match those things. I don't mix traditions in the sense that I don't take a Shaolin-based meditative practice and try and roll that into some of my Taoist practice. That's irresponsible and dangerous. So I certainly wouldn't do that. Most of my Shaolin is more external work, and my Taoist traditions are internal work. But my template for self-mastery is more of a Shaolin template, very traditional methodology and very traditional theories that come from my Shaolin background. So let's talk about what those 10 steps are, and I'll address each of these steps in upcoming podcasts. I think the first one I've got coming out probably next week is I'm going to combine the first two because they tend to go, they kind of dovetail with each other. They work together. So the 10 upcoming podcasts, the first one is investing in proper effort. Okay, so we'll dive deeply into that, and the other is value of structure. So when you look at those two things, they work together because you want to build a structure in your life that maps out a template for how you're going to manage each day to put forth the proper effort. So that's why I put those two together typically. We'll talk about the value of self-discipline and how that helps you accomplish goals, and how it helps you begin to restructure your body, your mind, and ultimately your spirit, and get those things put together. The work that we do creates personal energy. That's number 4. So creating personal energy, the more energetic you are, you'll be shocked as your energy level goes up. Your energy level will go up by doing more work. So that seems like a contradiction, but it's actually not. So as you get into doing the personal work required for self-mastery, you're going to find that instead of it draining your energy because you're putting in this work, your energy level is going to skyrocket. But we'll talk about that. Making proper choices. Life is to be lived. I tell that to my students. I live that myself. We're not monks. We're not living up in the mountains at a temple. We live in the real world, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying life. But there's a consequence sometimes when, and you just need to be aware of those consequences that come along with it. And the podcast on making proper choices will talk about all of those things. 5 hindrances, that's a very Shaolin. The 5 hindrances are a Buddhist tenet, and we'll talk about those. There are 5 things that hinder your self-growth. And we'll talk about that. Like I mentioned before, mindfulness, what is mindfulness? How do we achieve mindfulness? We'll have one of those. And quality. They're building qualities within the body. This is kind of like the building blocks to success. Okay, so we'll do, that's physical. Okay, so when we'll talk about building physical qualities within ourselves, as well as mental and emotional qualities. That's going to be, that could actually be quite a long podcast for that one, but it would be very, very beneficial. Learning to live the middle way, we'll talk in depth about what that is. And then finally, the last of the 10 steps is continual change. That pretty much is self-explanatory, but how do you manage change? How do you deal with continual change? And as we go through each of these steps, you'll find that change isn't all that daunting anymore. Because you'll be equipped to handle pretty much anything that life has to throw at you. So anyway, that's the 10 steps, and those are the upcoming podcasts that are tied to that. Really looking forward to getting those out. Like I said, the next podcast up is going to be the first 2, investing in proper effort and the value of structure. So in closing, first of all, just to reiterate, if you would, if you've stayed with this podcast for this long and you're listening to it on YouTube, I really would appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, and if you would subscribe to the channel, that would be helpful. In closing, the things we covered today, we discussed self-mastery, all right, developing the 3 selves, body, mind, and spirit. We talked about the toolkit, the methods to achieve self-mastery, and we hit on a lot of the martial side of things. There's a whole lot of other things that we're going to talk about. If internal work and this other doesn't really strike you as something that you want to do, there's still a lot of value to be gained, and we'll talk about a lot of different exercise and getting out into just doing things and how that's beneficial for you. But we talked about physical training, in Kung Fu, Qigong and internal martial arts and practice. We talked a little bit about meditation, briefly touched on the I Ching Jing, the Chinese muscle changing classic. We talked about that, and then we discussed the first 10 steps to self-mastery that we'll cover in the coming weeks. So anyway, that basically is what we talked about today. And as always, I really appreciate you guys investing the time to listen to this podcast. Look forward to really start breaking out the informative podcasts that are coming up beginning next week. And as always, have a blessed day, and thanks for listening.